Hi, Oscar Carmona. I'm owner of Healing Grounds Nursery. I also teach the Green Gardener program through Adult Ed. And we're here today to continue our conversation about IPM, which is short for Integrated Pest Management. And if you recall, we were over in Alicekeck Park, and we were over at Island Seed and Feed talking about different aspects of IPM. And today we're going to continue our conversation and talk specifically about beneficial insects. We're here today at Lotus Land in Montecito, and we're going to speak to a good friend of mine, Corey Wells. Corey, pleasure to see you
on
this fine spring day. And we're here in your insectary. It's famous, becoming very famous throughout the area, and now I think statewide as well, as you connect into the broader network of beneficial insects and insectaries. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this part of the Lotus Land? And I also want you to mention a little bit about the transition that you made to this point from where Lotus Land was, so that your average gardener can see the potential for change in their own homes.
Sure. This area was actually a flower garden going way back, to the days of Madam. But it was never really maintained properly, didn't have enough irrigation, that sort of thing. So it was completely transformed 3 years ago to be a proper insectary garden. Not just butterfly garden, but pollinator garden, beneficial insects of all sorts, and especially native bees. So it does have a history of being a flower garden, but now we've really taken it to the next level. The plants here too, mostly are purchasable locally.
So when we're speaking about an insectary, it's important to note that we're talking about plants that are allowed to flower, right?
That's it,
because
pollen and nectar. It's all about pollen and nectar.
So that's the key, right? Letting plants flower, because a lot of times in our landscapes, we overly prune and we never allow the plants to unfold and to flower. So that's definitely a key part of it, right?
Yeah, I think we're seeing that in the last 20 years, 10, 20 years, we're seeing that type of Mediterranean landscape where they're allowing the plants to reach their full size, planting appropriate sized plants for the location, and then being really smart about choosing that plant, not just for looks, but does it actually attract the beneficial insects? A recent study proved that almost 95% of what we put in our landscapes repels most insects. And so what we're showing here is these are the exact plants to massively attract the insects.
And thanks to you, a lot, in large part, things like this have greatly added to the ability of this garden to thrive without the use of pesticides. Is that true?
It is true, and really the way I like to think of it is what a perfect model. Take a huge estate in Montecito with great funding and huge support, and why not demonstrate there? What better place to demonstrate all of our sustainable techniques using compost, organic fertilizers, removal of all pesticides. If we can, I've always felt if we can prove that here, that it works 100%, all the other big estates in the area, the homes in Santa Barbara and other cities, Carpinteria, and all the visitors that come here from around the world, they all get to see it actually works.
That's great. And so, what I've noticed right away is that there's a variety of plant sizes, shapes, right?
Shapes, blooming times. So we have early spring with our annuals, and then we have our late fall, some of our buckwheats and things that come on later.
That's really important, isn't it?
Yes, you want to have a pollen and nectar source through the entire season, even from early spring all the way to almost the beginning of winter, really. Several different types of bees. Remember, there's many species, and they all have these windows that they grow, and they need that pollen and nectar source at that time.
Well, that's a great point, because typically in springtime on a beautiful day like today, everybody appreciates the flowers and all of that, but we forget that we need to have plants that are going to bloom later in the summer, so that that there's ongoing sources of pollen and nectar, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Corey, let's take a little look around in the insectary and see what the different plants are that are growing and blooming, so that the homeowners can figure out what it is they may want to put in their own landscape.
My pleasure.
Wow, here's a beautiful spot in the garden with all this nice color. Let's start here and talk a little bit about what's going on.
This area has turned into kind of a meadow effect, actually. You have the verbena and you have the native yarrow, the white, through there mixed with some poppy and scabiosa. This kind of meadow effect is actually very easy to produce. The poppy seeds are just tossed around, and now I don't even have to use those anymore because they'll reseed themselves. And then the other plants can be limited if they get too far out, but they grow so easily, and this is all very drought tolerant actually too.
And I see bees, and I see there was a moth here just a second ago, some butterflies.
Butterflies.
So all sorts of insects, the ones that we can even see, and I'm sure that there's ones that we're not even locating that are here.
Yeah, there's Coreopsis here too. Heliotrope is the purple there. A lot of these are locally available too, so you can get most of these. And poppy seeds cheap too. So this is going to be it's a fun design here. There's actually quite a few other things that are coming up through too. You have these bigger poppies, these ornamental poppies. In the back you have California sunflowers, and then the big tall plants, Echium, that most people know of Pride of Madeira. This is a special variety of Echium called Echium wildpredii. Has one large stem with one giant flower and lots of little flowers on it. Normally it's a branched plant is the one that we know locally. But these are a lot of fun. Yeah, I can see the honeybees coming in.
It's wonderful.
Let's head on down.
Well, this garden is so full of life. Look at all these beautiful insects. You can see bumblebee, and you were just saying a second ago, there's many species of bees.
Yeah, we have almost 100 species just in this one area.
100 species of native bees.
Not honeybees,
That is
native bees.
amazing.
We probably have about 105 or 10 native butterflies to this area.
And so some of the flowers are larger, some of them are smaller, and that greatly adds to the diversity of insects that are attracted.
That's a good point. You know, it's really the small flowers is the most important. Big flowers, once in a while, you know, some of the sunflowers and things are fun. They have the old-fashioned sunflower with the flat front, not the new hybrids, are very good. But these tiny flowers is really the way to go, because remember, a lot of those insects are microscopic. They're small, we can barely see them. So they need the right pollen and nectar, but they also need the floral design. You'll see the bees working on here now. They're just getting in there. This one's collecting pollen. This is a honeybee here off the top.
That's beautiful. And this is an Echium, right?
This is that Echium wildpredii. Remember, a key point at Lotus Land design and for beneficial insects in general is mass planting. You want to plant a dozen, if you can, of something in a whole area. Bees, native bees especially, like a mass cloud of flowers all at once blooming. They don't want just one little flower. They won't come back then.
Yeah, and you know, I just thinking as I'm looking over this pretty naturally growing area, what much of a contrast it is to the other aspects of your garden, which are pretty formal in many ways.
Yeah.
And so this is one of the things that we want to get homeowners to sort of envision for their own landscapes, that you don't have to always highly manage or manicure, although we're not saying good or bad. But this allows more of a habitat that will attract insects, something that's just naturally maintained.
You prep the soil, you plant, and then you leave it alone. Or you might top something once, just so it blooms, just so it has a round or more full, multiple flowers, not just one.
Yeah.
But that's it. There's not a lot of pruning involved. In fact, you want to stay out of the beds is the secret. Once these beds are amended and fluffed up, soil compaction is probably one of the biggest killers of a landscape. So no one goes in these beds.
Right.
And you can cultivate weeds if you need to with a hoe from 10 feet out. So no human steps on the soil. That's a huge lesson I'm trying to get through. Build your beds like they do in biodynamic design that are 4 feet wide or 5 feet wide, and then you can go around and through without stepping on those berms, those planting beds.
Right.
And you'll see phenomenal growth that will surprise you.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Corey, for your time. It's always a pleasure, especially on a beautiful day like today. So beneficial insects are definitely a big part of IPM. You can have them at your home by inviting them in with beautiful flowers that are always in bloom. We try to do this as much through the year as possible. I hope you're inspired to take a visit to Lotus Land, and until we meet again, happy gardening.